मैं इस समय आपके बीच में दिल्ली से बात कर रहा हूं और दिल्ली में कुछ ही महीने पहले एक बहुत बड़े इलाके में एकाएक बगैर वजह दो संप्रदायों के बीच में तनाव हुआ। फिर देखते देखते दुकानें लूटी, मस्जिदें जलाई गईं, दर्जनों लोग मारे गए, सैकड़ों लोग घायल हुए और हजारों लोगों की जिंदगी पर बेहद खराब असर पड़ा। और ये कुल एक घटना है। किसी भी देश के अनुभव में कुछ कारण होते हैं जो शांति का आधार बनते हैं और कई कारण होते हैं जो अशांति का कारण बनते हैं। शांति और अशांति के बीच में जो बुनियादी फर्क है वो न्याय और अन्याय का है। कोई समाज अगर अन्याय से न्याय की तरफ बढ़ता है तो वहां अशांति घटेगी और शांति बढ़ेगी, क्योंकि मनुष्य स्वभाव से अशांति प्रिय व्यक्ति नहीं है। स्त्री और पुरुष अंततः निजी जीवन में दो चीजें चाहते हैं, सुख और प्रसन्नता। प्रसन्नता अशांति में, हिंसा में नहीं हो सकती। सुख का तो सवाल ही नहीं है। इसीलिए आज की दुनिया में जो दिशा है वो पीस विद जस्टिस। एक और शांति बन सकती है जहां किसी को बोलने की आजादी नहीं हो, किसी को सोचने की आजादी न हो, किसी को अपने पसंद के फैसले करने की आजादी नहीं हो। उसको हम कहेंगे मरघट की शांति, कब्रिस्तान की शांति। आप कभी कब्रिस्तान में जाइए, सैकड़ों लोग वहां दफन हैं, मर्द औरत, हर उम्र के, हर वर्ग के, और पूरा सन्नाटा है। क्यों? क्योंकि वहां किसी की जबान नहीं है, किसी को बोलने की छूट नहीं है, कोई गुंजाइश ही नहीं है। तो इसको कहते हैं मरघट की शांति।
Professor sir, can I interrupt for 1 second?
जी।
Can you speak in English?
Okay, very well, very well. We are today engaged in a conversation about role of youth in peace building, and we know that there are two kinds of peaceful societal situations. One is the peace of graveyard, and the other is peace of lively people. Peace of lively people is related with justice. Conflict is caused by injustice, and injustice can have many forms, many dimensions, many trajectories. If you look at a life around you and variety of conflicts, you'll realize that there are at least 5 patterns of conflict and violence. One is, which is prevailing from home to hospitals, from private to public spaces, is gender-based violence. Gender-based injustice promotes gender-based violence, and this is something where youth can make a major contribution. How can they make a major contribution? If you are a man, you must make a commitment that you will never do any injustice to any woman. And in case of any debate, argument, disagreement, you will never go for violence, because domestic violence and violence against women is a global tragedy, and women call it a cause of deep sorrow, suffering in silence. And many women believe that it is just because they are belonging to an inferior gender. Simone de Beauvoir called it the other sex. So sex-based or gender-based injustice is one reason of prevalence of violence and conflict, and youth particularly young men have a primary role in eliminating this kind of conflict and promoting peace between men and women at various levels. The second form of conflict is based upon classical global reality of class, the conflict between rich and poor. They say that ये जमाना तो पैसे का है, दुनिया अमीरों की है. Poor have no way to hope for justice and hope for peace. And this is where poor get organized and collectively they create a rule of law, certain rules for their wages, certain rules for their working conditions, certain rules for their pension, medical care, leave facilities, etc., etc. What can youth do there to eliminate class-based conflicts? They can help in conscientizing and organizing the poor, the resourceless, the underprivileged, the marginalized. So organizing the poor will make minimization of conflict because both sides, the employer and the employees, the rich and the poor, they will have to recognize each other's relevance, each other's claims, and try to be just to each other. And that's how we can contribute towards class-based conflict resolution. A third dimension of conflict is prevalent in different parts of the world on different lines, but they are based upon birth. In Europe and America, it is called racism, where your biology becomes the basis of conflict, basis of superiority and inferiority, because blacks were bought as slaves from Africa to serve the original inhabitants of Europe and European migrants in America. The black slavery is no more there, but racism is there. Stereotypes about black and white, skin color based attributes and attitudes are very prevalent. Recently, you saw in America that there was a man who was charged by police for certain violations, and in the name of implementing the law or controlling somebody who is not following the law, they killed Floyd George, and that erupted. Protests all over United States first, and then Europe also, actually global protests against racism. A similar protest or similar situation of conflict is growing in countries like India based upon caste. Caste is a great social barrier between human beings, and there are caste-based prejudices. There have been caste-based discriminations, deprivations, and destitutions in our memory since centuries. And this got institutionalized during the British rule. And today, our constitution is committed to move us from caste-based society to a casteless society. And this movement is creating friction between those who want to maintain their traditional privileges and those who want to assert for their dignity and rights on the basis of Constitution of India, which was adopted on 26 January 1950. And this becomes a basis of conflict. First competition, then conflict. And here again, the youth of upper caste or dominant caste can make significant contribution by trying to develop castelessness in their attitude, in their behavior, in their intimacy, in their public activities. There is also contribution from the youth of the so-called dominated or underprivileged or discriminated communities who can follow Dr. Ambedkar's suggestion of getting educated, organize, and assert for their rights, right of dignity. So youth in the context of caste conflict and race conflict can develop capacity of the society to move from peacelessness to peacefulness by helping to change and challenge the wrong attitude based upon race in Europe and America and based upon birth-related inferiority and superiority perpetuated by our customs and institutions and practices for centuries. And here women can come forward because women suffer double injustice, first on gender lines and second on caste lines. So there is primacy of women in meeting the challenge of race or caste-based inequalities, injustices, and resolving conflict. A fourth conflict, which is not so prevalent in peace times, is based upon nationality, nationalism. They create international wars. Our world witnessed 2 long wars within a short span of 40 years. First was 1914 to 1919. It was called the First World War. And the second was between 1939 and 1945. It is called the Second World War. Primarily, this war of 1935 to 39 to 45 was between European countries. Later, Japan and America also moved in, and colonized countries like India were forced to send their youth to participate in their masters' armies, like Indian youth in a French army, in British army, Algerian youth in French army, Indonesian youth in Dutch army, and so it became a world war. Today, the youth can move forward to promote a world without war by arguing for going beyond war, beyond weapon. Europe has succeeded in it. You know that Europe was the theater of 2 great wars, lot of killings in millions in the previous century in the first half, but then they came forward to support what we know as peace movement. And today, total Europe is integrated as European Union. They have their nationalities, but they have also created a civilizational continental solidarity called European Parliament. Asians are far behind Europeans in this process. Nationalism still excites us. We are always eager to teach a lesson to our neighbor. Indians are eager to teach a lesson to Pakistanis. Pakistanis are reaching for a war with India. There is problem between Bangladesh and India. And there is also war between various countries around China, Vietnam and China, China and Japan. They're all simmering with spirit of violence and conflict, and youth will be the primary casualty. I'm not suggesting that you don't be patriotic. Loving your nation does not mean killing people of other nationalities or dominating other nationalities in the name of superiority of your country, but it is there. One more form of conflict is around religious differences. This is one of the oldest and bloodiest form of conflict in human memory, mostly between 2 different religions, Christians and Muslims, Jews and Christians, Jews and Muslims, Hindus and Muslims, Sikhs and Muslims, and often between sects of the same religion, Catholic and Protestant, Shia and Sunni, Vaishnavite and Shaivite, Majhabi and non-Majhabi. So there is this religious basis, religious cleavage, which promotes, which pushes, which excites for conflict. And again, how youth can contribute in peacemaking by learning about all religions, by understanding the politics of religious identity, the politics of identity to begin with, caste identity, class identity, gender identity, national identity, and of course, communal or religious identity. We have realized in our journey towards making competence for conflict through developing weapons, that weapons are no way to solve conflict, because ultimately we all have invented atom bomb, hydrogen bomb, which can kill millions of people with pushing a few buttons. And major countries of the world, America, China, Japan, not Japan, but Iran, India, Pakistan, Israel, they all have acquired nuclear weapons. And these weapons are so useless because if you use them against your neighbor, today your neighbor will be hurt, tomorrow you will be hurt. It happened in Chernobyl. Nuclear accident created deaths of millions of Russians. It happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, when Pakistan dropped a few bombs and two great cities of Japan were eliminated. And a lot of people became victim of nuclear radiation for the rest of their life, men, children, blind men and women. So Japanese decided to eliminate the system of army altogether. There is no formal Japanese army. And there is a military alliance now between America and Japan. So we have to think about nationality-based conflicts. Old people cannot judge the future because future is not for them. Anybody who is 60 years and above is living in a bonus time. Between 5 to 10 to 15 years, they will be not anymore on this earth. But anybody between 18 and 30, 35 has to learn to live with each other for next 40, 45 years. And if you don't learn to live beyond war, beyond weapons, you are bound and you are doomed to kill each other and of course live in shame for the rest of your life, as are the Germans today, Russians, French, British. They are friends today, but they have very sad memories of the period of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and Tozo. So we have to learn from history, and this can be done by younger people by understanding the limits of violence, limits of war, limits of our power of weapons. One more dimension of conflict is on ethnic lines. Many of the post-colonial countries, including India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they're all victims of ethnic conflict. It is not between two castes. It is not between two religions. It is not between two genders. It is not between two classes. It is between two historico-cultural identities. So Tamilians and Sinhalese were killing each other for years and years in Sri Lanka at great cost to the nation-building process in Sri Lanka. In India, it is under control. But for a while, there was great tension on linguistic lines in southern India between Tamilians and Hindi-speaking people. It was there in Assam, between Assamese and non-Assamese people. And to some extent, it is simmering in many metropolitan cities of India between the locals and the migrants. In Nepal, it is between Madhesis and Pahadis. In Pakistan, it is between Sindhi, Baloch, Punjabi, Pakhtun, and many others. This ethnic conflict is also a huge conflict generating machine, and this requires understanding of peace building. Now, I have underlined various social fault lines present in most of the societies, but most prominently in India. Is it possible to imagine that we will move to a world order where there will be no conflict? I don't think so. Conflict is around interests, and there will be always diversity of interests on the basis of age, education, gender, caste, class, region, religion, nationality. What youth can do different from the previous generations is to learn the art of non-violent conflict resolution. From where can we learn it? We have a great example from South Africa. South Africa was victim of racial violence for many decades since the times of Gandhi. When there was a major decisive conflict on the lines of racism, leaders like Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu came forward. First, they said no violence at all, no matter what the racist South African regime does, we will not go for violence. And when the global support became overwhelming for the minority racist government of South Africa, and they had to agree to reconcile with racial diversity and allow the majority people, that is the blacks, to have political equality. Of course, power came in the hands of Black majority African National Congress. But what did they do? They went for the path of truth and reconciliation. They said we cannot ignore the truth of racial violence committed by police, army, and other privileged minority people belonging to white races. But we cannot have reverse discrimination. We cannot have reverse violence. We have to go for reconciliation. So they put on trial all the guilty of violence during the apartheid regime, but they also gave them an opportunity to reform themselves, to confess the truth of their mistake, and to commit to live a life of racial harmony. We have a similar example in Indian national movement, where Gandhi was against foreign rule. So was Indian National Congress. But they were not against British as such. They were for truthful system based upon freedom for all, political equality for all, justice for all. That included Anglo-Indians and people of European origin. And several Europeans were granted citizenship of India after India's freedom because we were not racist. We were for freedom, not at the cost of taking away rights of the white people or European people. Similarly, we also have adopted the path of respect for all religion. Most of the countries in the world have tendency of moving in the direction of majoritarian religion, majoritarian languages, majoritarian race. In case of India, we have given right of equality and fundamental rights to all people, irrespective of their numerical strength. And we call it the path of Sarva Dharma Samabhav, the road of respect for all religion. Therefore, there are certain guarantees to prevent homogenization and hegemonization of the less numerically smaller groups by numerically larger groups. But this is not the practice in many other parts of the world. And therefore, if there is discrimination against minorities, particularly Hindus and Sikhs and Christians and Buddhists in Bangladesh or Pakistan, and they come here as refugees, many Hindus get angry and they want to punish Muslims of India for the mistakes of Muslim rule or Muslim politicians of Pakistan and Bangladesh. Is that fair? Is that reasonable? Is that justified? Not at all. But some people believe that there is more affinity, more solidarity because of religion than because of nationality. But India is not a country which is supporting this very sectarian, xenophobic attitude. But then what can youth do about it? Youth can come forward to learn about the constitutional principles, the fundamental values of Indian society. And there we have a great departure. We never had this kind of egalitarian, humanitarian approach to human society to create a just human order. But it was possible because Indian freedom struggle was a struggle of unity of people of all religions, all castes, both genders, and all ethnic groups, all linguistic groups. Today, we are far away from the memories of freedom struggle. Therefore, we have become a little disconnected. And many of us have started thinking on different lines. This has made your youth of India more prone to violence, to conflict. But I was suggesting that there can be conflict without violence. And that's where youth can also get themselves trained in non-violent conflict methods, peaceful conflict methods, because there are certain conflicts which are inevitable, which are functional, which are useful. We cannot live in denial. And for those roots to get them eradicated, there has to be a challenge, but it has to be a peaceful, reasonable challenge. I told you about those dimensions of conflict. Gender-based discrimination, it requires resistance from women who are victim of it and from men who do not like it. And that resistance may create a temporary conflict. But if it is a non-violent conflict, we will have positive results. Similarly, caste-based discrimination, caste-based deprivation, it creates a lot of anger among the victims and equal anger among the perpetrators, because it is problem of power, grammar of power, dynamics of power. It's a zero-sum game. But democracy makes it a win-win situation, because pre-democratic caste order created discriminations and deprivations on the basis of birth. But democratic political order creates political equality, equality of opportunity, equality of resources, equality of legal provisions. We are treated as citizens, and citizenship-based entitlements do not recognize distinctions based upon gender, caste, religion, or ethnicity. So if we become committed to Constitution, that will be one major leap, a big step forward, and which is the process of citizenship building. I think there are two challenges before youth of India today. One is nation building, creating a democratic nation for which we don't get much resource from the past. We have to be futuristic, based upon reason, logic, human values. And second, citizenship building. We come from various families, various communities, various religions, various regions. And we have to rise above all these sectarian considerations to become citizens. Now, citizenship building is also a new process. It was not there in 200 years of British rule. We were subject of British Empire. From 26 January 1950, we become citizens of India, who are sovereign, who are under nobody's control except Constitution of India. But this has to be recognized, internalized, and this has to become basis of our daily life. It was not there in previous generations. So it is a new thing for us, a novelty. I think the time has come to learn the art of non-violent social life. If we have a non-violent social basis of social relations, then conflict may be there, but it may not be violent conflict. It may be conflict on the basis of ideas, reason, logic, facts. And then we can agree to let the truth prevail. Satyamev Jayate. Whoever is on the side of truth is heard, is given the dues, and those who are based upon untruthful claims recede, adjust, compromise, reconcile. Let me conclude by arguing that conflicts are there in the making of society itself because of inequality of resources, historical memories, dynamics of power, claims of a better tomorrow. There are several fault lines in the making of our society, from family to nation and the world order. These fault lines need repair, need patching up, need harmonization, which may require resistance and reconstruction, and it may lead to conflicts. But if we cultivate the art of non-violent conflict resolution, then we have hope for a better, peaceful tomorrow. As I said in the beginning, conflict is in search of justice, and justice is mother of peace. If we ignore injustices, we are inviting deep conflicts. But if we are alert about injustices and be habitual of following the path of justice, it will minimize the potential of conflict, and of course it will maximize the possibility of a happy coexistence of men and women, people of different castes, different classes, different religions, and different regions. I'm a student of society and a concerned citizen, but I'm sure that what I have said must have created certain questions and confusions in your mind, and therefore you have every right to put your perspective, and we carry this dialogue forward as a question-answer part of this session. So may I request Hemant Yadav ji, मैं हेमंत यादव जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि पिछले आधे घंटे में जो बातें मैंने कही, उनके आधार पर जो सवाल बनते हैं, जो टिप्पणियां बनती हैं और जो जिज्ञासा बनती है, उसको सामने लाएं, तो मुझे बात को आगे बढ़ाने में बहुत खुशी होगी. धन्यवाद.
Thank you so much. Please, participants, kindly ask your question, because you will not get such types of chance in future. Okay, और ये हमारा भाग्य है, सौभाग्य है कि आज सर से हम बात कर रहे हैं. Please, Ragini Joshi, yeah, please ask your question. Unmute yourself. Milind sir?
What I wanted to say is not just the youth, but shouldn't he?
Yes, Ragini, unmute yourself.
Sir, what I wanted to ask is, should not just the youth, but shouldn't the children too be included in this? That is, today's child will be tomorrow's youth, so they should be gradually introduced to this field also.
Very true. You are very right. As Hemant had confined me to youth, the children are youth of tomorrow. And children are much more sensible. They are still very flexible. They always argue with their parents when their parents are promoting casteism or sexism or racism or communalism among the children. They immediately ask, why, mama? What is the difference between a boy and a girl? What is the difference between a Hindu and a Muslim? Why I can't play with people of other caste or community? So children are much more receptive. So between the age group of 7 and 12, when they start developing their personality, it is very important that we also include children in our engagement of building a better value system and a better perspective. Thank you for this very important correction.
Yeah, Bharat sir.
Ji.
Please ask your question, sir.
Good evening, Professor. It was a very lucid and nice lecture. I would request you to elaborate on the statement that during British time, the caste system was institutionalized. Because as I understand, the institution of caste and even institutional form also existed long before British arrived. So unless it is given some kind of legitimacy through the laws that British enacted, that could be probably one explanation. But otherwise, we have stories of Eklavya and Karna and whatnot, a lot of things coming from.
Very true, Bhatji. This is very appropriate to understand that discrimination on the basis of birth was institutionalized centuries ago, before the British came. But caste was a regional phenomenon. And it is even today, as you know, that there are several thousand castes. There are 3,500 so-called OBCs. There are around 1,200 so-called scheduled castes. They are always bound by regional patterns. But when the British institutionalized census system in 1881, they went around the country and labeled practically everybody in the British Indian area. And these censuses started giving an idea of strength and number of various castes. Then they developed caste associations. And these associations started claiming privileges under patterns of, in the name of various affirmative action. And gradually, British also codified Hindu personal law and Muslim personal law on the basis of certain texts, which were nearly invisible texts, like Manu Smriti for the Hindus. There are several Smritis, but they got a few Pandits, Sanskrit scholars to codify, and then they were given Hindu code, Muslim code, and that became the basis of relationship between state, the colonial state, and subjects according to their religion. So standardization of caste identity and standardization of religious differences in civil life, personal life, was essentially a British product, because prior to that there were very many riyasat. Peshwas in Pune area had very tough caste rules against untouchables, no doubt about it. But those rules were not applicable in Punjab. The Nambudiris of Kerala were very hard against the Ajuas. But then Sri Narayan Guru's movement created a social revolution. Same in Tamil Nadu, in Bombay, Madras Presidency. There was very strong practice tradition of untouchability. But then there was equally strong anti-Brahmin movement, which made the non-Brahmin communities a bit privileged through affirmative action in Mysore, in Kolhapur, Sauji Maharaj, and many others. So I stand corrected with your help, Bhattji, that caste was not invented by the British. Caste is a pre-British phenomena. It is also not only a Hindu reality, it is trans-Indian reality. Among the Muslims, you can change your religion, but you cannot change your caste. That's what the Dalit Christians are saying. Pasmanda Muslims are complaining. But British institutionalized it at all India level through census, through recognizing caste associations, through entertaining caste-based representations, and through categorizing people for a variety of entitlements on the basis of their caste. And this has been done, this analysis, this documentation with help of many social scientists, but that can be another topic, and I request Hemant Yadav to organize a discussion about caste, continuity and change in Indian social order. Because many of us think that caste is no more there because there are reservations, there is no caste-based behavior allowed in law, but caste is very much there. So there are certain continuity, but there are certain changes also. So Hemantji, CSSS should organize a session about caste in India, is past, present, and future.
Yeah, sir. Before asking I have one question. उसके पहले मैं Dr. Sunita, she is a faculty in Banaras Hindu University. I am calling her. Madam, आप अपने आप को unmute कर लीजिए. Please ask your question. Sunita ji, Doctor, अभी सुनीता जी का मैं Dr. Kapil, you can unmute yourself, sir.
I have given the permission. Anyone who wishes to speak, please unmute themselves and they can ask the question. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
We can listen, Dr. Kapil.
हाँ, नमस्ते सर. हेलो.
हाँ, सुनाई दे रहा है कपिल जी, बोलिए.
हाँ सर, नमस्कार सर. सर मैं जयपुर से डॉक्टर कपिल कुमार आनंद बोल रहा हूँ सर. और बहुत ही अच्छा जो सर का लेक्चर था, बहुत अच्छा लगा और बहुत सारी बातें जो है इससे सीखने को मिली, समझने को मिली. सर मेरा एक प्रश्न है कि अगर हम वर्तमान अगर परिस्थितियों को देखें, अगर पूरी दुनिया की या भारत की या एशिया की, पूरी दुनिया की अगर हम परिस्थितियों को देखें तो हमें जो है वो जगह जगह पे संघर्ष दिखाई देता है. चाहे दक्षिण एशिया की बात करें, चाहे वेस्ट एशिया की बात करें, चाहे महाशक्तियों के बीच में जो आज की तारीख में जो तकरार हो रही है वो हम देखें, या जैसे पहले कोल्ड वार था, उसके बाद में अभी जैसे नया शीत युद्ध है. तो मेरा प्रश्न सर ये है कि आखिर ये जो संघर्ष हैं, ये जो हमें नजर आ रहे हैं डिफरेंट टाइप के, इनके क्या बड़े कारण हैं और क्या उनके निवारण हो सकते हैं? पूरी विश्व के कॉन्सेप्ट में सर मैं बात कर रहा हूँ कि आखिर क्या कुछ ऐसे निवारण हो सकते हैं, क्योंकि हम टीचर हैं और हमको उस विषय पे आगे चलकर सोचना है, मंथन करना है, रिसर्च करना है. तो आखिर वो कौन से एरियाज हो सकते हैं जिस पे फोकस करके ये जितनी भी जो संघर्ष की बात है इसको कम किया जा सकता है? तो सर मेरा ये प्रश्न है सर.
बहुत धन्यवाद डॉक्टर कपिल. हमको दुनिया में जो संघर्ष हो रहे हैं उनको दो लिहाज से देखना होगा. एक तो इतिहास के आईने में अगर आप देखिए और मान लीजिए कि 2019-20 में जो हम बात कर रहे हैं, अगर हमने ये बात 1919-20 में की होती तो वो दुनिया कैसी थी? उस दुनिया के समय में प्रथम विश्व युद्ध चल रहा था, चारों तरफ हाहाकार मचा हुआ था. उस तरह का संघर्ष आज नहीं हो रहा है. आप आज इतिहास में जाके देखिएगा कि प्रथम विश्व युद्ध में कितने लोग मारे गए, उससे ज्यादा लोग द्वितीय विश्व युद्ध में मारे गए 1939 से 1945 के बीच में. तो उस माने में हथियारों के बल पर एक देश दूसरे देश पर चढ़ाई करे, ये बहुत घट रहा है. अंतरराष्ट्रीय युद्ध घट रहे हैं, कुछ हो रहे हैं. जैसे अमेरिका ने इराक में जाकर के ये झूठा आरोप लगाया कि उनके पास संहारक अस्त्र हैं और उनको इराक के शासन को ध्वस्त करना था, या अफगानिस्तान में लड़ाई चल रही है, या सीरिया में गृह युद्ध हो रहा है। तो एक तो ये अंतर्राष्ट्रीय युद्धों, हिंसक घटनाओं के बारे में अगर आप ऐतिहासिक दृष्टिकोण लें तो पिछले 100 साल में हम युद्ध से अयुद्ध की तरफ, फ्रॉम वॉर टू वॉरलेसनेस बढ़ रहे हैं, लेकिन एकदम खत्म नहीं हुआ, ये आपका कहना ठीक है। दूसरे आंदोलन हैं जो न्याय के आंदोलन हैं। देयर आर अदर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स व्हिच आर conflict for justice, just like we had in America last month. After the killing of Floyd George, most of the anti-racist people came out in the street. And there was some violence also, looting of shops, fighting with police. But this was to address a traditional source of injustice called racism. There are resistance activities by men and women in the streets of India against violence about women. औरतों का आंदोलन, पुरुषों का आंदोलन, हिंसा के खिलाफ, जातिवाद के खिलाफ, और आंदोलन है गरीबी के खिलाफ। तो ये जो, लेकिन कुछ गृह युद्ध हैं जो सांप्रदायिक हैं, जो भाषाई हैं, वो युद्ध भी यूरोप में तो आज बिल्कुल नहीं है। यूरोप, which was home of all kinds of violent conflicts for nearly 2.5 centuries, from Industrial Revolution till the end of the Second World War, is today one of the most peaceful parts of the world. And in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where there was peace of graveyard, मरघट की शांति थी, कब्रिस्तान की शांति थी, वहां लोग आवाजें लगा रहे हैं न्याय के लिए। लैटिन अमेरिका में संघर्ष हो रहा है नागरिक अधिकारों के लिए। अफ्रीका में आप जानते हैं, यू नो अबाउट अफ्रीका, दैट द होल idea of Africa was challenged by colonial masters. Tribes were divided, cultures were decimated. Now they are decolonizing, and there are conflicts because of the pressures of decolonization. Of course, there are also conflicts introduced by corrupt politicians for power, corrupt military leadership for holding on to power. So we have to do mapping of the conflicts around the world, categorize them between conflicts for justice and conflicts for perpetuation of injustice. Then we also have to compare the situation historically. How was it in the 20th century and how it has become in 21st century? Then you will come to a better understanding, and then you may probably find that gradually there is promotion of freedom, political equality, gender justice, class justice, decline of racism, and challenge to casteism. There are also conflicts about preventing destruction of environment or preventing pollution of air and water. So these are new forms of conflicts, but they are for environmental justice, social justice, and they have to be differentiated from conflicts which were between two dominant groups for claims of power, like French and British fighting to control India, Portuguese and Spanish fighting to control Latin America, or various white racist countries of Europe fighting to keep control over Africa. It was qualitatively different kind of conflict.
Thank you, sir. We have lots of questions. Before दूसरे क्वेश्चन शुरू करने पे मैं एक I am going to put one example. उसके बाद मैं क्वेश्चन करता हूँ। सिक्किम में एक छोटा सा गांव है जिसका नाम मैं भूल रहा हूँ, लेकिन उस गांव के नाम का मीनिंग कुछ गलत है। मतलब मनपरी नाम है गांव का, उसका मीनिंग का, उसका गांव के मीनिंग का कुछ गलत है। तो बिफोर, अभी सरकार बदल गई है, लेकिन इसके पहले जो सरकार थी श्री पवन चामलिंग जी की, उन्होंने क्या किया कि एक रूल किया कि जो भी व्यक्ति अगर उस गांव के नाम से उस गांव को बुलाएगा, उसको 5,000 रुपए जुर्माना प्लस 1 हफ्ते की जेल की सजा होगी। तो हुआ क्या कि उस गांव का नाम बदल के आदर्श गांव कर दिया गया और पुराना वाला नाम जो है खत्म कर दिया गया। तो हम यहाँ पे इसलिए इसको हम एग्जांपल दे रहे हैं कि भारत में बहुत सारा कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है, कास्ट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट बहुत ज्यादा है। स्टिल हम कहीं भी जाते हैं, हमें पूछा जाता है आप किस कास्ट से हैं। अब चाहे हम प्रोफेसर हों, चाहे एक्टिविस्ट हों, चाहे जिस भी कोई भी हो, ठीक है। हम सर आपसे पूछना चाहते हैं कि भारत कब जो कास्ट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट है, जो कास्ट पूछने की परंपरा है, ये कब खत्म होगी सर? हो सकती है कि नहीं हो सकती है सर? प्लीज सर।
ये भी बहुत अच्छा सवाल है। दिस इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट क्वेश्चन। व्हाट इज कास्ट? कास्ट हैज बिकम a basis of security in social life. When you go to an office, you have a problem, nobody is listening to you as citizen, and then you are told that, oh, the other person is from your caste. And that person, once he knows your caste or she knows your caste, starts feeling affinity. Caste is a very important social insurance system. It protects you in times of emergency. It is also giving you certain privileges in day-to-day life. It is a principle of social solidarity. If we get a better principle of social solidarity, social insurance, social justice, like nationality, class, political identity, then we will not use our caste. Oh, you are a communist, I am also a communist. Bhai bhai in Kerala. Oh, you are from RSS? Namaste, I am also from RSS. Then in central government, which is controlled by RSS, you have a good chance because you are RSS. If you are in Rajasthan, you are Congresi, I am Congresi. So their caste becomes marginal and political identity becomes primary. But if you go to a village which is structured around caste barriers, then you have to depend upon your caste identity if you want local support. This is why in politics, political parties are created on the basis of caste identity. Earlier, parties were created on the basis of political goals. Indian National Congress was for freedom of India. Communist Party of India was for classless society. Socialist Party of India was for socialism in India. Hindu Mahasabha was for Hindu Rashtra. Muslim League was for Pakistan. Today, it is the other way around. There was a freedom fighter, martyr, his name was Chandrasekhar Azad. That generation was committed for Azadi, and Azadi was an ideology to unite people. Today, people will like to know the caste of Chandrasekhar Azad. Many people even today don't know caste of Gandhiji because he was Rashtrapita, father of the nation, because he was suffering for freedom of India, which was everybody's dream. Netaji Subhash Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, Jayaprakash Narayan. Now your question, what is the future of caste? Caste is basis of social inequality and social security. If we promote citizenship, just because you are Indian, you have certain entitlements, then you will not use your caste. If you promote equality, political equality, economic equality, and social equality, to the extent possible, then caste will not be necessary. But if we live in a world of deprivation, discrimination, injustices, then whether I like it or not, people will like to know my caste first and then my personality later. So relationship between caste and India is related with future of inequality and equality. If we continue to live with inequality, if we tolerate inequality, of social nature, then caste remains important. But if we become engaged in nation building around the idea of India, then caste will become marginal. It will become a private reality. Caste may be there, but casteism may not be there. But today we see that there is competitive casteism. And that is different from casteism of colonial India. In colonial India, there was no political equality. So there was no competition between various castes. Today, because of political equality, because of right to vote and equality of everybody's vote, major castes in terms of population strength are getting organized and they get involved in competition for political power. So it is no more old kind of casteism. So there is certainly a radical change. And this may lead to decline of significance of caste. If we promote education for all, health for all, housing for all, and employment for all, then where will be the basis for caste-based behavior? No relevance.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Another question from Sahitya. Please unmute yourself, Sahitya.
Good evening, sir. Actually, I just have a small query. Am I audible?
Yes, Sahitya.
Yes.
Is there, it's a very small query, is there a conflict resolution in contemporary world politics? And if it is yes, what do you have a say on this? When we talk about the conflict resolutions, in case of this Rohingya cases, where the interventions of the UN is very less on the human rights violations. So how can we trust such a body which intervenes according to their own interest? I mean, mainly the interest of the superpowers or the P5 members. Likewise, in the Middle East, they intervene so much that more than 50% of the conflict arises due to their interventions. And they neglect the sovereignty of the independent state. So my question is like, why in this conflict resolution context thing, why this UN have a kind of a biased, kind of a conflict resolution policies in according to their own interest?
You have given a very important example of the growing insignificance of United Nations organization in making effective contribution towards conflict resolution. This is a very tragic development where majority of the conflicts are beyond the capacity of United Nations organization. We had something called League of Nations prior to United Nations organization. And this League of Nations could not do anything to prevent the Second World War. And after losing millions of lives, innocent men and women in international war, the world thought of becoming peaceful and created a United Nations organization. And soon after creating United Nations organizations, we entered into the era of Cold War. Two blocks, one led by America, England, the other led by Soviet Union and China. Now, Soviet Union is not there on the scene, but that vacuum is filled up by China. And now the world is polarized between China and America, United States of America and China. But you will also appreciate that some of the old conflicts have been resolved in these 30, 40 years. Because of the previous war, Germany was divided in two parts. Vietnam was divided in two parts. Today, Germany is one, Vietnam is one. Korea is still divided. And during the end of the Second World War, Israel was created. And that conflict is still going on, though that it has become less violent and less intensive. India and Pakistan also got created in 1947. And this is a very hot zone of international conflict around Kashmir, Pakhtunistan, and now China and India in Ladakh. So focus is changing. Intensity is declining, but United Nations is failing. So probably, as you rightly said, the world is in the command of 5 major powers who are members of the Security Council. And we need a new architecture of international relations. It was thought that globalization will minimize international wars because the power is shifting to international agencies like IMF and World Bank. But now World Bank and International Monetary Funds are failing. There's global recession. And there is return of nationalism, economic nationalism. Mr. Trump is all for America, Putin for Russia. Chinese leaders are for China. And other leaders are also asking for nationalism and not multiculturality, not internationalism, not humanism. So your question is at a very bad time because we see return of nationalism and nationality related competition and conflicts. And we are also seeing declining role and impact of United Nations organization. So the conclusion is that your generation has to think of a new global architecture and more effective body of international coordination in place of United Nations organization. I hope that you will be more lucky than my generation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Can I ask Hemant? Can I ask something?
Sabia ji,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
really sorry, but we are running out of time. It's already 7. So really sorry, but if you can, is it a quick question? Can we can this be the last question?
Hi, good evening, Anand Kumar sir. It's a pleasure to hear to you and not meet face to face, but at least ear to ear. My whole question is that we just had a new education policy on 29th of July 2020. And such a big 34 years passed and a new document came in for education. And nowhere in that entire document of about 129 pages, we see the word peace education. They have exclusively used word scientific temper, sense of aesthetic, languages, humanity, ethical reasoning, digital literacy, knowledge of India. And they said people who will be there in the Sahitya Siksha Ayog of education should have unimpeachable integrity. That means if I talk against government, I'll never be taken into this thing. So how do you envisage that if the makers of curriculum do not understand that first thing is peace, how are they planning to have peace? I mean, how will we have peace? I don't know. I'm so flabbergasted that they have not spelled out the word peace here. My only worry is that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for this observation. You know that governments create a framework according to their definition of the situation. This government had failed in accepting the first education policy document submitted by its own commission led by TSR Subramaniam ji. I am congratulating this government to accept this one, at least Kasturi Rangan committee, because otherwise we were drifting from no policy to no policy for last 30 years. There was only one policy, commercialization of education, and no other policy. We were reducing the expenses on education. This document is arguing for 6% of GDP for education.
Yes,
but policies are not framed only by government. There will be a response from the society. People like you and me will say, my dear teacher, my dear vice chancellor, my dear minister, please pay attention to the need of conflict resolution, peace building, gender justice. castelessness, communal hatred must be addressed, ethnic violence must be controlled. Then they will have to accommodate. You know that there was no formal space for gender education, women education.
Yes.
But after an eye-opening report in 1974 towards equality, all over India and the world, there was a wave of gender studies program. We hope that people like you and me and organizations like CSSS will push for cultivating art and science of conflict resolution and peace building from school education to university education. And this cannot be ignored because we have the great heritage, long heritage from Buddha and Mahavir through Kabir, Nanak and Gandhi of signifying the need of peace and compassion, karuna and ahimsa. These are the fundamental principles of our civilization. So if you want to have an Indian education policy, how can you ignore the need of cultivating non-violence and compassion in the schools and colleges education of India? Thank you.